become legend. Hercules, Astrea, Mercury, working together with Sentinel 1 and my maintenance robot, Mo. These teenage guardians form the Space Sentinels.
When I was a kid, I enjoyed the Greek myths, I enjoyed science fiction. There was nothing like the Greek myths on television. We developed a show about teenagers and teenage superheroes. Well, I thought about Hercules and Astra, and then we wanted to do a girl again. Well, I had to do girls again because I'd get yelled at home. And it's very fun to look at girl drawings. And the guys who were doing the models really loved it. We sold it to NBC, and what we wanted to make sure is the cast was multi-ethnic and multi-gender and multi-age-wise too, because there was this one character that they used to talk to all the time that looked like a giant computer, who I think I did the voice of too, I can't remember. And it was really before computers had really done much in our society, and to stick a computer into an animated show really was graphically interesting. I loved it. The lights on this. Originally, the show was called The Young Sentinels. I think it should have stayed The Young Sentinels. The network thought it should be something more about space. So we have changing a name, okay. I think it hurt the show in a way. It is the Space Sentinels now. Buy it as the Space Sentinels. It's still the Young Sentinels.
I started working in Filmation in 1975. Actually, I didn't work there, but I sold one script to Arthur Nadell for ISIS. It was my first sale. And the way I did it was I went in, I pitched him an idea that he loved. I said, ISIS meets Bigfoot. And he, sort of fell over backwards, and, his hair fell off, and he said, that's great, we'll do it. So then he did something that was not very smart of him and very nice of him, which was, instead of buying the story from me and assigning it to someone he knew could deliver a script on time, he let me write the script and took a chance on me. And so I turned in a script that was producible, and he bought it, and that's how I got into the Writers Guild, and that's how I got my foot in the door. So it was all due to Arthur Nadell. After writing 2 of the live action episodes for Filmation, I went back the next, when the season started the next year, and to see if I could find any more live action work. And they weren't doing that much live action work at the time, but they steered me down the hall to the animation department, which at the time was being produced by a very nice writing team named Lynn Jansen and Chuck Linville. Nice guys. They were doing a show called Space Sentinels. And I pitched them an idea or 2. I think I wound up writing 3 of them. And it was the first time I'd written for animation, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed writing animation a lot more than writing the live action shows, because it was easier, obviously, to come up with stunts for the animated characters than it was for the live action characters. So I wound up writing for Space Sentinels. I wrote Black Star, Flash Gordon, Tarzan, He-Man. It's a lot of stuff. I freelanced. I never worked on staff, but I was pretty much all over the place at Filmation. Space Sentinels, like Black Star, was a show that was rather surprisingly sophisticated in its material, I thought. It was a good, viable science fiction idea. You had these 3 characters who were considered to be the source of inspiration for the mythological figures of Hercules and Mercury and Astrea. And they were actually the defenders of the Earth. They came from outer space. They lived in a spaceship in a volcano, and they had the master computer that ran things. It was a much more sophisticated idea than you usually saw at the time in science fiction films on TV. The first show that I did for them was called The Prime Sentinel. It was an idea that they just bought like that when I pitched it. And it was about a master computer that was in the center of the galaxy that ran all the Sentinels on various planets, including Earth. And the Earth team and a team from another planet are gathered together to go help the Prime Sentinel on a mission of galactic importance. There's an amusing story about this. This happened in the summer of '75, I believe. And I had come up with the menace that they had to battle. And it was sort of an amorphous energy field that I called the Force. And Chuck called me after I turned the script in and said, you know, this is probably nothing, but there's this movie coming out, and I've heard it called Star Wars. I've heard there's something in it called the Force, and maybe we should think about changing the name to something else. So I sat down, I thought about it for a while, and I called Chuck back and I said, I really can't think of anything else that works as well as the Force. And he said, well, you know what? It doesn't matter. The show won't be on until November. By that time, the movie will have come and gone. Nobody will remember it. Fauna, I believe, was the second one that I wrote, and I can't tell you a lot about it. Back then, if you're really lucky, you might have been able to get a copy of the show from the studio, but that was like at the dawn of the age of videotape. I managed to tape the other two, the Prime Sentinel and the Wizard of Oz, off the air. I never did get a chance to see Fauna. The Wizard of Oz was an odd story, actually. It was just sort of a throw anything at the wall and see what sticks kind of a story. We put in the Cheshire Cat, and it was, I don't remember much about writing it. I just remember it was a lot of fun to write because it had all different types of elements from various fantasy stories. There was a little bit of the Wizard of Oz, there was a little bit of Edgar Rice Burroughs, this and that. But one thing I do remember about it was that we were on a tight deadline. I actually had to sit there in front of a typewriter at the time and write the entire thing in one day. And after writing it, I got up to put the script together and take it in and deliver it, and my back spasmed and I couldn't even get in the car. It's really a remarkable thing that the show has survived all this time, been so popular with people. I mean, I thought it was a good show. I enjoyed writing it, but I never thought that 20 years after the fact, I would be looking at a box set of it on DVD. They'd be doing interviews, commentaries, all this sort of stuff. It's quite touching. It's quite exciting.
The way I got involved with Filmation was I had recently left Art Center, and a good friend of mine, Mark Evanier, told me that they were doing an animated version of Star Trek, and that I should get myself and my portfolio over there to become involved if I could. And I packed up all my fan art of spaceships and aliens and took them over there and showed them to Don Christensen, who was the art director, and hired me on the spot. And I started right away. I was at Filmation from 1973 through 1980. Space Sentinels was another project where we wanted to create a show that was totally a Filmation property. And we were very influenced by the latest science fiction successes in the theaters and wanted to do something that had that kind of excitement and feel and was contemporary. So we used a lot of design ideas that we thought would feel like they were current. One of the best examples of that is the giant holographic head that bears somewhat of a resemblance to the video images that you see in Star Wars. So we designed that big head so that it had that feeling. The other thing that we designed was the little robot character who has somewhat of a similar look to the robots that we're seeing in Silent Running. I was at Filmation for, 7 years, I guess, approximately, and they were my first years in animation, and they were a great introduction to the business of doing cartoons, and everything happened in that one facility. You had all the steps in creating a cartoon there, with the exception of getting the film processed, which had to go out to Technicolor. But It was a great experience. There was a very high level of camaraderie and fraternityship there. And we all found ways to make the work as much fun as we possibly could. Interestingly enough, for the first time just a few weeks ago, I Googled myself, and I was really surprised to see how many Filmation projects my name was attached to, and how often on the internet images of these shows came up. And I'm really pleased to see that they have received this kind of enthusiasm down through the years, because quite frankly, it's very surprising.
How did I get my start at Filmation? The short version is that I co-wrote with Russell Bates an episode of the animated Star Trek, which was one of the very last episodes that they did of the second series. But it was a pretty darn good episode, I thought, and it wound up being the one that won Star Trek the Emmy Award as Best Children's Program. That kind of got us noticed at Filmation, but that was also done at the very end of the '74 season, so there really was no more work at that time. But the following season we came back and we worked on several shows, a bunch of cartoons that were all part of the Uncle Croc's block, and the show that everybody wanted to work on, actually everybody wanted to work on Shazam. I, for some reason, could not get on Shazam, but we did manage to get on ISIS. And I refer to we throughout this because I was collaborating at this time with my then wife. Space Sentinels was, I did a show almost exactly like it for Len and Chuck 5 years later in Hanna-Barbera called Teen Force. And I believe the original title of Space Sentinels was The Young Sentinels, and it wound up being called Space Sentinels. Space Sentinels was another Star Wars-y type thing. The thing that I remember most about it was, first of all, it was one of those times where Michael Reaves, who's a very good friend of mine, and I basically carved up a show. Between the two of us, I think we wrote almost every episode of that series. And it was the first time I had ever written a lot of shows, of episodes for one series. Normally you go in, you do 1, 2, if you were lucky you got 3 or 4. On Space Sentinels, I really don't remember the number, but I know it was at least 5 or 6, which was, in those days, a lot. This was 1977, 76, something like that, but it was before the days of He-Man and Transformers and these 65-episode syndicated strip shows where you could write 20 of them if you wanted to. So doing 6 was a lot. What happens when you do a lot of episodes for one show is that you start looking for new things to do. And you start doing almost like theme and variation, or looking for weird and oddball things to do. And in a way, I consider this the first step that I took on the road to what ultimately I would do with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which was by around show 4, I was starting to get a little bored with things. So I throw in weird stuff to try to keep myself entertained, basically. The one thing I remember about Space Sentinels is there was a show, I did an episode where a guy, one of the guys was, basically they were in trouble. They were over one of the moons of Jupiter, and they had to launch like a decoy to draw the enemy's fire. Almost like what they call countermeasures on a submarine, where you throw some junk out in the water and the torpedoes go after that instead of you. So they had to jettison something from their spaceship to draw the enemy's fire. And I went, okay, what are they going to do? Well, they could jettison a fuel tank. These are all visually very boring. And I went, I have no idea why this came to me. It's just bizarre. I went and reloaded in a backstory where one of the characters bought and restored an antique car, like a Model T or something like that, in the first act. And it's his pride and joy, and he just loves it. And then in the third act, they have to jettison it in order to draw the enemy's fire so they can go off and save the day. And basically, you have this image of this Model T Ford floating down over one of the moons of Jupiter, being torn apart by rays. And I went, I like that. That's weird. That's something you haven't seen in a cartoon before. Once you do a number of episodes of one series, your mind starts thinking in the direction of the different and the weird and the offbeat. And by the time I had done 800 more shows 10 years later, basically, along came Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and all that. I was able to let all of that, those impulses in me loose.